Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, Mastering Light, Secrets to Stunning Photography, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Giulia Ciampini. Excuse me. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you all so much for being here today. Take it away, Giulia.
Thank you so much, Rob, and thank you everyone who is here today to join me in this topic, Mastering Light, Secrets to Stunning Photography. We are gonna get started. An hour passes very quickly. So to start us off, I wanted to give us an outline of what we're going to talk about today, so you can prime your brains and get ready. We'll go through a quick intro, and then I want to dive into the properties of light. Talk about the quantity of light, quality, direction, and temperature, and give you some creative prompts that you can straight away use with your own photographic practice. And then we'll have a little bit of time for a question and answer period. Please feel free to ask any question. If I don't know the answer, I will find the answer for you or direct you to someone who might know the answer. So just to introduce myself, my name is Giulia Ciampini. I'm a photographer and teacher and also a guide. I have guided in about 30 different countries, and a lot of what I do is photo guiding. I absolutely love the natural world and sharing that love with others through photography and through storytelling. I work with Natural Habitat Adventures and also their sister company, Lindblad Expeditions and Smithsonian Student Travel to guide as much as I can in any given period of time. And I'm coming to you with a background in biological science, education, and fine arts. So my previous NatHab program was just in Churchill. I often guide in Churchill, and it will be polar bears, belugas, and northern lights. And so my next upcoming trip with NatHab is during polar bear season. I have quite a few rounds of polar bears, and I'll be up there from late October to late November. And as of maybe yesterday evening, I just got back from an expedition in Japan. And I only bring this to mind because I am severely jet lagged. So I'm sorry if I'm not as articulate as I would hope to normally be. But let's dive into the topic of light. And I think, and many photographers believe, that the light is one of the most fundamentally important component of great photography. Light, composition, and moment. These three things come together to make powerful images. When we look at photography and define it, it's the art or science of recording light on a film or sensor where an image can be reproduced or produced. And you often hear of photography being defined as painting with light. And here you have Pablo Picasso painting with light as though he's painting with charcoal. And the camera is recording that painting with light. Light and photography are married in the most important way. When I went online, I found some quotes about light and photography, and I just wanted to bring some attention to these. Light is everything when it comes to photography. I look for good light, and then I shoot what's in it. I'm forever chasing light. Light turns the ordinary into the magical. Light makes photography. Embrace light, admire it, love it. But above all, know light. Know it for all you are worth, and you will know the key to photography. So light is fundamental for photography. And I'll start with this example that I bring up often. Here's a kind of chaotic scene in Japan, about to cross a street, messy people, messy cars, messy everything in front of you, but you see just a nice glimmer of light, and with that glimmer of light there's a potential for a powerful picture. And so if you can capture the other parts of it, that light moment and composition, you can lead yourself towards more powerful pictures. As another example, recently from Japan, just a scene in a temple where a bride and groom were, and it's a fine picture, but there's always ways to use light in order to make your pictures stronger. And so kind of seeing the scenes in more creative ways, in more interesting ways, letting light be a pillar for your photography will lead to more creative images. So my hope for this small period of time that we are together is you'll develop a slightly deeper understanding of light and how it relates to your own photographic practice. Understand that there is no bad light, there's just different light for different purposes. And every single artist will have their favorite lights, or their lights that they have acquired and they're very proficient in using and working with. And you have to practice to find your own, and you have to practice what you like and what you don't like and what works well in order to get a sense of the way that you like to express yourself. So I hope you are inspired to play and experiment and really practice with light in new ways and develop that attentiveness to the light that's around you, that awareness of the light that's around you, and then use that in various ways throughout your practice. And light can really affect the mood of your images, the meaning, the style, the feeling, and your viewer's response. It is powerful. So I mentioned that we would talk about the 4 properties of light. So those 4 properties are intensity, quality, direction, and color. Intensity, quality, direction, and color. And we'll talk about each of them in turn. But I just want to make note that there is a difference between artificial light and natural light, and the light that I'll be talking most about is natural light. Artificial light, you're thinking your studio strobes, your flash units, any light that you are controlling fully, where you can influence the color, the intensity, the quality, and direction. And it's the light that you're bringing into the scene. That's your artificial light versus your natural light. And your natural light, the best source of natural light is the sunlight. And though you can manipulate natural light, you can use reflectors, you can use various tools to manipulate the light. You can't fundamentally change the sun. It is influenced by weather and time of day. And natural light just doesn't have to be only outdoors. You can think of being in your kitchen and having that early morning sunlight spill through a window, or a soft glow enveloping a room inside your house. So your natural, like you can see the light that's coming in through my office right now, this little beam of light that I've directed via my curtain. So we're going to look at how natural light, how we can work it to our advantage to take better images. So property 1, intensity of light. And when we think of the intensity of light, the question here really is how much light is entering my camera. And about a few weeks ago, I did a presentation on digital photography 1-on-1, where I really dove into this subject matter quite a bit. How in any given scene, you as a photographer can dictate how much light enters your camera. You can allow a lot of light to enter your camera, or not that much, or some amount in between. You have control over the amount of light that comes into your camera. And I briefly went through how a camera works. And essentially light will come from a source, sun for example, and bounce off your subject. And then from your subject, it will enter your camera. It will pass through the aperture in the lens, which is an opening, and it will pass through the shutter once you open the shutter to take the picture, and that light will be recorded on the sensor. And so you have control over the aperture, you have control over the shutter, and you have control over the ISO in the sensor. And all these 3 things, these ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, allow you to control how much light enters your camera. So I've done a course on this already, or a presentation on this already, and I would encourage you, if you haven't seen it or you want a refresher, it might be a good one to go through. And I talk much more about this exposure triangle and how you can control how much light enters your camera. But what I want to focus here on in this moment is that every scene that you are presented with has a different amount of light available to you to pull into your camera. And some scenes are bright and full of light, and some scenes are much darker, and there's not much available light for you to pull into your camera. There is a quality called lux, and this isn't one that I was familiar with throughout my practice, and I don't think it's especially important except to say, except to define it and kind of get a sense of how it works. So when it comes to natural light, this intensity refers to how strong or bright the light is from the sun. Lux is just the unit of measurement for this light strength. For example, bright daylight is anywhere between 111,000 to 120,000 lux, where shade during the middle of the day is around 20,000 lux. So I love this picture here because it shows you in a given scene, in a shaded area versus a well-lit area, the difference between that measure of light strength is quite drastic. So if you're attempting to take a picture of these two different light amounts, strengths in a scene, you're kind of having to deal with these two things, this bright area and this more shadowed, darker area. And that can give you a lot of creative things that can come from that problem, but it is a creative problem that you have to solve as a photographer. So how much light do you have in front of you in your scene, and how are you going to deal with that light? The problem here lies in the fact that the human eye sees the world very differently than the camera sees the world. The camera isn't able to see that full range of tones from very light to very dark in one go, where the human eye is. I'll dive into the quality of light. This is our second property here, and when we talk about quality of light, we talk about how hard or how soft is the light in front of us. How hard or how soft is the light in front of us? And there's two basic qualities of light, hard light and soft light. And I have this little infographic that breaks down both. On the left side, you see an example of hard light, and on the right side, you see an example of soft light. And what I would like to direct your attention to is the quality of the shadows with the hard light versus the quality of the shadows with the soft light. With the hard light, the shadow is very clearly delineated. You see light and you see dark. It's high contrast. The shadow is there. In the soft light, you don't see that shadow as distinct. You might have a very gradual, soft, blended shadow, but it's not this dark light. It will be this soft, gradual blend from dark to light. You also notice between the hard light and the soft light, the direction of light beam. So if you look at this little beagle diagram, and you have the light source in the top left corner, with the hard light, all the beam of light is directed in one direction. It's hitting the subject very directly in one direction. Whereas on the other side, the soft light, the light is hitting from multiple directions. It's being diffused by something in the environment or something around. And so we have a very direct source of light or a very diffuse source of light. So let's look at these two qualities a little bit more deeply. Quality of light, we're talking now about hard light. As I said, it produces very strong, crisp shadows. It produces a much higher contrasted scene. The direction of light is clear. Because of hard light, you see textures and shapes much more exaggerated, and hard light can lead to very dramatic and moody images. So we can use that hard light creatively to impart feel to our images. So let's look at some examples of hard light. With hard light, we see these distinct shadows. We're very, very clear that there is lightness and there is darkness. With hard light, you see the direction of light very clearly. I know that the light is hitting this bald eagle from the top left, slight top left, like kind of 45-degree angle, based on where the shadow is positioned. But the direction of light is very clear. I can also look at the catch lights in the eyes to give me some information about the light itself, the light source itself. With hard light, you have much more of an intense interplay between lightness and darkness, and that can be really fun to play with your imagery. And as I said, textures and shapes and colors are typically exaggerated with hard light. For example, the colors on the colors of the feathers on this bird here are much more intense than they would be if this bird was in very, very, very soft light. And also with the hard light, you would most frequently find this light around noon, around those hours of the day where the sun is coming high in the sky and beaming straight down. A few other things about hard light. It's not always flattering on a face, though it can be. And typically hard light is light that is not being modified. When I talk about a modifier, I might be talking about like a diffusion screen. So, for example, if you are familiar with flash diffusers, like the Gary Fong diffuser, it was essentially a small clear piece of plastic that was put in front of a flash unit that scattered the light around the subject, and so it was much more soft around the subject itself. And as I said, it's such a direct beam of light with the hard light. So back in the day, you used to see these beautiful images of stars and models often being shot with much more hard light, and you can see this in the face of the shadows in their face. You can see a very distinct shadow versus light and how the shadow is shaping their face itself. So really looking at the shadows on the face, where they fall, where they lie, and how hard they are. Excuse me. So with hard light, we can use that high contrast to emphasize our subject. As an example here on this bighorn sheep, they're naturally meant to camouflage into their environment. So the picture on the right, you can't really see this bighorn sheep, but if the sheep were to enter the light, you can use this hard light to emphasize the sheep itself against that background. I think I have it set so that it's migrating forward naturally. But you can also look for beams of light in any kind of places, in churches, in anywhere where you have particular beams coming into the environment. And you can use these almost like spotlights in the subject matter. So whatever great subjects fall in the beam of light, that's your subject. Where your light is shining, that's where your subject is going to be. The other thing too you can look at is what kind of textures and colors and do you want to emphasize, and how can your light source help you emphasize those? So in Japan, they have this tradition of gold-plated ice cream, and it was meant to show excess, to show wealth, to show this we have so much gold plating, we can put it on our ice cream. So how can I emphasize how shiny and sparkly and this quality of this gold light? Obviously the light can come in and help me emphasize this. If I took this picture in soft light, you wouldn't get that that bright sparkle of the gold. And so kind of understanding your subject, where it is, and what kind of light you can use to emphasize the subject itself. As another example, I mentioned that hard light isn't necessarily always flattering on a subject. This is a great example of why that's the case. This very sweet boy jumped out from the laneway in Colombia and kind of posed for a picture, but it was midday, harsh sun. And you can see under his eyes, under his nose, under his chin, there's very, very distinct, strong shadows. And the textures on his face are more emphasized. And so while the picture of him is sweet, it's very cute, the lighting on his face isn't necessarily the most ideal. We didn't speak the same language, but I saw that he had a handful of money and he was going to the doctor's office to pick up something for his mom. And I noticed where the doctor's office was, it was more of a shaded environment. And so I knew that if I were to photograph him there, it would be a more appealing lighting on his face, a little bit softer, less of those harsh shadows under the eyes, under the nose, under the chin. And so I positioned, can I take your picture here? And he smiled and we engaged. But it was just a different shot based on that alone. And so anytime maybe you have midday sun and it doesn't really work with your subject, look around you to see if there's a place that you can take your subject, maybe not far away, that they could be in shadow or they can be in more appealing light. So we talked a little bit about hard light. Now we'll talk a little bit now about soft light. Soft light, the light tends to be relatively large in comparison to your subject. And the light itself, the light rays are scattered and diffuse. And so they, instead of hitting your subject directly on, they really wrap around your subject. So we're seeing this no shadows whatsoever, or very, very gentle shadows. We're seeing this softness around our subject matter. Again, no shadows whatsoever, gentle, soft, clean. You're not playing with depth here. You're not playing with shading and sculpting. It's a very clean, different look entirely with soft light. And so soft light rays come from all different directions. The light and dark areas of your subject will blend. And as I said, it's really going to give this impression of wrapping around your subject. Little to no shadows, and if they are shadows, the shadows are weaker and have blurry, soft, diffused edges. So another example, it's just really gentle, no shadows, gradual, soft. I've always liked this look. I find it really appealing. And one great time of day or place or way to get this kind of light is look for shade, look for cloudy days, and look for you yourself can bring diffusers into the field. There are large scrims or almost like a sheet of white fabric bent around like a circular hoop that you can put in front of the light source that will diffuse the light and soften the light. So you can kind of see in my office, there's this big beam of light. Imagine that I had this white, much larger than this, but this white piece of fabric in between the light and myself, and it would break up that light and soften it quite a bit. So the third property of light that I want to chat about is direction of light. And when we talk about this property, we're asking, where is the light coming from? What direction is the light coming from? And more specifically, how is this light positioned relative to the subject? So typically when we look at a direction of light, we look at about 5 different types of directions. You can kind of break it down into that. You have front lighting, side lighting, back lighting, light from above, and light from below. And I want to go through each of them because each of them have a very distinct feel. And understanding where your light is coming from can help you choose where you'd like to position yourself for each subject you shoot. And you will very frequently see diagrams like this when you search for direction of light on the internet. And it's a beautiful, there was this photographer who had an experiment, and he had all his students photograph an egg, like a regular chicken's egg, and photograph it with all different types of light, all different directions of light, all different locations, in order to get a variety of images from this one standard egg, and to help them learn how to see light and how to find light. So something like this is a good visual example. But there's another tip that I always had, and if you use your own hand in any given lighting situation and you put your hand up, you can see the direction of light based on how the light is hitting your hand. You're looking for where the shadows are falling, and it's really hard to demo this online, but next time you're in any environment where you have a light source and you want to see what direction that light is coming from, position your hand out and see how the light changes, and the light and shadow change on your hand itself. And so in this way you can see, like, the light is coming from here, so it's backlight. I can see a glow or halo around my fingers from this end. So I know that obviously the light is very visible coming this way, but maybe if it's more subtle light and I don't know, I can find out this way. On this end, I can see the light is, like, there's no discernible shadow on the front of my hand. If there were, it would be behind the hand. That's front lighting. And as I come to the side, I see shadow in half my fingers, so the light is coming from the side. So your hand can be a little clue as to what the direction of light is looking like. But this slide here is just a wonderful example of how much the direction of light can change the look of your subject. From front lighting, where the shadow falls behind the subject, to backlighting, where the shadow falls in front of the subject, to that side lighting, that split in between light and darkness, to overhead and underneath. It looks like a very different shape. It looks like a different form. It has changed the feeling of this subject. And so you often also see really creepy mannequin shots where photographers will set up a mannequin and then test different lighting styles and directions and maybe flash outputs in order to see how it shapes and molds the face. And popular in studio photography, these maybe systems of lighting setup. So you might have a 3-point system of lighting, so 3 different lights directed at your subject, or you might have a 5-point system or a one-point system. And how are you arranging your light sources? How much power and intensity are you putting with each? The direction, the color, all these factors come to play. But in order to communicate the lighting setups to other photographers and you in the future, you have these lighting diagrams, these scripts. And so here's an example of the different positions of the light source relative to the model, relative to the photographer, and what those look like for the image. So for example, on the left, the first most is your front lighting. The camera and the light source are in the same position in front of the subject. You see no discernible shadows on the face. The shadow falls behind the subject. You're not seeing that much molding or shaping of the face itself, because as I said, the shadow is directly behind. It's not to the side. It's not shaping in any way there. As we progress second on the left, the light is moved to the side of the subject. Now we're starting to see a little, it's not quite to the side, but that 45-degree angle, we're seeing a little bit of that molding and shaping of shadow against light on the shape of the face. We have that shadow extended on the nose. And we have a little bit more of this darkness versus lightness. As we continue to move the light source around, now the light is beside the subject itself. So very much a side lighting, or also known as a split lighting. The face is split into half, this light and dark. And really interesting, more dramatic light there. As the light progresses further behind the subject now, we see just a halo of light around the subject's hair. So it's illuminating the back of the head. You don't see that from the view of the camera. So you're just getting this small halo. And this can be absolutely beautiful with wildlife in the field. For example, a polar bear just being illuminated by the light, and just that small halo around the glow of the polar bear. On the final two, the two that are closer to the right, you're seeing shot from above, shot from below. We are so accustomed to seeing human faces lit from above that they look eerie when they are lit from below. The sun is high, it's going to be, that's the common lighting situation we're accustomed to. And so anytime you see Halloween lights or Halloween whatever, or spooky, you want to get that feeling of spookiness, the light source might be coming from below. So just to break that down a little bit more, front lighting is in front of your subject. It's giving you very, very flat lighting, no shadows. You'll see this, for example, here. Side lighting produces really interesting light. It's starting to show the shape of your subject and casting a partial shadow, and that shadow is giving a more dramatic look. If you're familiar with art art Rembrandt lighting is a very effective, common example of this type of lighting. And so here are a few more examples of this. So you can very clearly see the light is coming from this side of our subject. We have one side shrouded in darkness, one side in light. And as a small example from a few days ago, we were departing a small Japanese town, and they surprised us. We're on a ship, National Geographic Resolution, and they surprised us with a farewell performance where you can see it on the bottom. There was about 10 or 15 performers playing instruments, and many people from the community came out to watch the performance and watch us depart. It's a beautiful sunset day. And the light was coming off from the side, casting a very, very soft glow on the performance. And it's almost perfect side lighting. You see this young performer here. He has just on one side of his face that just gentle shadow compared to the other side. This is maybe an example of the Rembrandt lighting. And with Rembrandt lighting, you can see it's an example of the side lighting. You can see on the cheek to the left, a small a small triangle facing down of light, and then a very characteristic pattern of shadow. And so you would see this with Rembrandt's work in the past. And it is a very popular style if you search for Rembrandt lighting. So one of the things that side lighting is fantastic for is emphasizing texture and emphasizing like shape and form. It's taking shape to form. And one consequence, you will often see bodybuilders or models, typically male, use side lighting to accentuate muscles, because with side lighting, you're starting to introduce shadows. And with more shadows, you're kind of emphasizing that this is a raised structure, or there's three-dimensionality to it, so it makes muscles look larger. So you have all kinds of videos on YouTube with people saying what's bad lighting for bodybuilders or what's good lighting for bodybuilders, but their purpose is to try to make themselves look more muscular, and side lighting will help do that. You're introducing shadow, you're creating more of that shape and texture. It's the exact reason why you often have female models not use side lighting for images of their face, because they don't want to emphasize pimples or textured skin with shadow. They want to eliminate the shadow, but it's the opposite purpose here. So backlighting, maybe not useful for all subjects all the time, but it can be very dramatic and very beautiful. You can create silhouettes with backlighting, and it can have this really magical feeling to it. So for example, anywhere in the field, when I did a lot of portrait and wedding photography and family photography, I would often schedule my sessions during golden hour when the light is low in the sky, very warm, and often position my subjects so that the light was behind them. And the idea here was that the light would stream in behind them and create more of an ethereal, beautiful kind of scene. A lot of what you're after is maybe a romanticized version of what family or love looks like, and that can add to that feeling. With backlighting, you can also get silhouettes, and with silhouettes, you're emphasizing shape and form again. You're reducing things down to basically this black object. And I've seen a lot of silhouettes now, and I've seen ones where the subject isn't clear because you've got a lot of overlap and it's complicated and doesn't translate well. But a great silhouette is one where you have very distinct forms, and it's brilliant sky and that form itself. So here in Cambodia, obviously large trees in the foreground, but the temples in the background. And then in France, in Paris, the Louvre, using just being there at the time of day where you can start to play with eliminating a lot of the information and reducing your image down just to color, to shape, to line, to form, all those rudimentary elements of art. That gets really interesting. So direction of light depends quite heavily on time of day, and that really leads itself to how it affects mood. So I'm not sure why every time I move the mouse, it moves all the slides, so I apologize about that. But this is a really great diagram for showcasing where the sun is in the sky and how the light affects the scene. And I do very much believe there isn't bad light. There's just maybe not the right purpose for the light that you have. If we just break this diagram apart, sunrise, sunset, dawn, and dusk, when the sun is really low in the sky, those are some of the most beautiful times to shoot. You're getting a very, very warm light. The colors tend to be really, really exceptional. And the angle by which they're hitting your subject it's a really gentle angle. It's really enjoyable to play with. There's a lot that can be said about golden hour and blue hour and dawn and dusk and sunrise and sunset, and I'll talk a little bit more about those momentarily. But I will say noon and morning and afternoon, kind of those mid parts of your day when you don't usually shoot, sometimes that's when the photography is available to you, and so you have to make the best of the situation you're in. So when we talk about time of day, getting up early is wonderful. Staying out late is wonderful. I'm going to move ahead to temperature of light and talk very briefly about this, and then kind of jump into some ideas that you can play with your own photography, just to keep things going. So understanding color temperature is a crucial part of understanding how light and color work together to affect your final image. Light has color. Light has color. As you go from room to room in your house, or environment to environment, inside, outside, every single light source has a color tint. The human eye is very accustomed to quickly sorting that out, but the camera eye doesn't. And so the camera sees very differently than how we see. And one of the things you do as a photographer is try to understand how the camera is seeing, so that you can see that world in the same way, and that can translate into your photography. But simply put, the color of temperature of lighting can be warm or cold, or anywhere in between. And temperature of light is measured on something called the Kelvin scale. And it starts at 1,000 kelvins, which represent the warmest light, and goes to 10,000 kelvins, which is the coldest light. And so if you take all the different light sources that exist and kind of put them measured by temperature, you would get this scale. And I love this diagram because it gives you a visualization of the color of the light, but also corresponds that with the Kelvin scale. And when I used to work a lot with videographers, I should preface this by saying, as photographers, we can adjust our white balance in post-production much more easily than any videographer can. So a videographer needs to really understand white balance in order to get the color rendition correct for video. And so as photographers, we would work alongside videographers, and they would enter a room and immediately like burst out with this room's 6,000 degrees Kelvin, because they had such a deep understanding of the temperatures of light, because they had so much time spent adjusting that part of the scene. And so, so different light sources have different light temperatures. A candle flame, for example, is much warmer than a cloudy sky day. The color temperature of natural light shifts with the time of the day. You have cold blue light before sunrise and after sunset. You have a much like a whiter light around midday, a whiter light, less cold, less warm. And then you have those warm golden light after sunrise and before sunset. And here's just an example of how much light, the same photo but edited slightly differently, can affect the look and feel of your image. One slightly warm, one slightly dark, one slightly light, one slightly blue. It's just a very, very slight variations does have a profound effect on your image. There are lots of ways that you can sort out your white balance, and I don't want to go through this right now, but some of them include setting your white balance in your camera, setting a custom white balance in your camera, doing it in post-processing afterwards in a program like Lightroom, or using a color checker white balance gray card to set that up. So there's lots of ways to kind of fine-tune this. For me, I typically deal with my white balance in post-production. In the field, I'm often set to auto white balance, and I just shimmy sham. I fix it just a little bit in post. So a little bit on light style and preferences. I'll often do little stories for the work that I do, and in those stories, I'm very much taken in very drastically different lighting scenes. But I think if you can kind of pull together images that look and feel good together, then you can bundle pieces of work, and I think that's wonderful to do. My personal preference is shooting sunrise, sunset, golden hour. It is a brilliant time of the day to shoot wonderful for landscape photographers, nature photographers, any photographers. The color temperature there is about 3,500. It's this warm, light orange and just warm. The intensity is lower because the light has dimmed, and the direction is coming in from a very, very slight angle. So it's traveling through all these particles in the atmosphere. It is long shadows. It is so brilliant to work with. So as much as possible, I'm out shooting during this time of the day. This alone, shooting here versus midday, will change the feeling of your images more than anything. It is a beautiful, beautiful time to be out shooting. Sorry, I'm going backwards. The next time is really fantastic. I don't find I'm shooting too often here, and I was thinking about why that was, and it was really to do with how safe I feel going out alone to shoot at night. And I don't feel as safe doing so. So it's really a shame, because this blue hour of light is a brilliant time to shoot. With blue hour, it's the time after sunrise, or kind of the time, after sunset or before sunrise, where the sun has dipped below the horizon and the light is colder, bluer. There's not much intensity, as the sun's not really in the sky, but you have this interesting quality. There's no shadows because the sun is gone, but here you can start to play with your shutter speeds without worry about strong shadows itself. So traveling around when I am out to play with this time, that it is quite lovely. So playing with slower shutter speeds and exploring there. I think every single light source that you come across gives you the opportunity to play as a photographer. So whether it's like a small neon sign, or very, very gentle, delicate, dark light. If it's a rainy day, the colors are much more brilliant and vibrant. If it's a foggy day, you have that atmosphere to play with. There's not so much light here, but it's a totally different feeling. Shooting rain, shooting fog, shooting snow, shooting bad weather, all your best shots will likely come from the more extreme conditions that you're in, unfortunately. And so some examples of just hanging around Churchill and seeing light in and around the town makes for some interesting pictures. Seeing light stream through a stained glass window, or a fellow guide checking the conditions and having those streams of light in, or just that soft backlighting around this little dog. I'll play with inside versus outside often, because you'll have layers there. You'll have your subject in a vehicle, or in a room, or outside a room, and how can you play there? So a couple prompts for you to look out for. Sometimes you really don't have a choice of the lighting condition you're in. This is when you get dropped off. This is where you get dropped off. These are the circumstances you're in. And this is what you have to make the best of. So it's a lot of creative problem solving. So these two deers, for example, they're in a pool of shadow with bright, bright, bright sun behind them. It's a very big contrast between the darkness of the shadow and the brightness of the sun behind them. And so you're washing out one of those things. You're either losing the detail in the deer or washing out the background. There just isn't the dynamic range for both. So you're making the best of the situation you have. It's not like you can physically move the deer to the light that you want them to be in. You just have to shoot where they are, how they are, and make the best of each. And so this is kind of an example of, you have speckled light, you have shadowed light, you have like backlight, for front light. You have all these different lighting directions and harshnesses and feelings. and how do you make the best of it given the situation you're in? One of the things I always look for is interesting shadows and how they play out against light. I might find pockets of light, so beams of light or pockets of light, and sit in that area and wait for something to come across the scene in front of me, and make a subject. And so I found the interesting light first, and now what can I pull into that interesting light, or what will pull into that interesting light? Window light is absolutely exquisite to play with. And so anytime you're in a situation where you have a sliver of window or two windows or large doors, or your subject is in a garage, for example, facing outward, you can play with the light around you. As I said before, I will frequently play with this inside-outside idea. You're inside, how is the light hitting the inside, but then also alluding to what's outside. And so here we're in Svalbard, and you get a sense of the outside context and inside context in one shot. There is a gentleness to light, especially in natural environments, that I find most incredible photographers are very in tune with. How light plays against clouds, how light plays against water. It's fascinating to see, in a 24-hour period of time. I shot this water from the ships that I work on, and it looks like a different water completely. It's a different beauty, each of them, depending on how the light is hitting, depending on how the water is moving. As you explore, look around for reflective surfaces as well. Reflections and reflective surfaces, water, mirrors, glass, anything like that can be a great source to play with light against. And with light, also looking for translucent subjects that you can emphasize the qualities of light with. Always say, look out for catch lights in the eyes of your subject. That's reflected light in the eyes of your subject. It makes your subjects look more alive, and you connect to that subject because of that aliveness. And then any given spot will look different at different times of the day. So here's maybe not the same spot, but similar. And it has such a different characteristic depending on what time of day this was shot at. So as an example of a few different assignments I give my students, I might have the assignment of same spot, different time of day, or I might have the assignment of one subject shot with 10 different lighting situations, or I might have this idea of light and shadow, or just darkness versus light. Go explore those concepts and come back, and it's so interesting to see what people come up with. As a final kind of closing tip, one of the things that I always recommend to photographers is this concept of having a graveyard. And I use that analogy because Halloween is coming up. A similar analogy would be a library. And it's this idea of going and searching for visual inspiration for you to help develop that visual language in your mind, so that when you are presented with a photographic opportunity, you already have some ideas of maybe it's something you'd like to try or do, or how you'd like to put your own spin on something. And so you might say, okay, if the light is streaming directly through, I might get this lens flare. I'd like to play with this idea on my next shoot. It's in your mind, and I always find there's game time, what you do in the shoot itself, and then there's practice time. And the practice time, whatever you do in your practice time, will make your game time that much stronger. And so looking for how other people are working with light. Are they maybe layering images? They're doing double exposures. They're playing with neon signs and portraiture. Here's an example. Looking at how photographers are playing with slow shutter speeds. These beautiful car lights in long exposures, or how they're playing with concert photography or fireworks and how they're using light in different ways. Some images that I absolutely love I have a folder on my computer and it's just inspirational images, and it's not that I want to copy these images, it's I want to break them down and understand what it is about them that I'm so drawn to, so that I can take those principles and put them in my own photography. And so something like this, it's so clean, it's so you have light as a strong component, you have composition as such a strong component, and you have moment as such a strong component. It exemplifies a lot of the things that I value. And so while I'm not going to be in this exact position, having this library of images that I'm floored by helps me grow as a photographer. And this next one is one of my favorites, and it's maybe not the best quality image, and unfortunately I don't know the photographer, but I love how layered this image is. I love the light in this image. I think this hazy, foggy, atmospheric haze, the different forms, the shapes of these animals in the foreground and the shapes of the trees in the background. I love this image. And so maybe not this image for me, but these principles of how can I layer my images more? How can I work with light in these times of days? How can I work with my subjects in these ways? As a final tip, I think we have only a minute or two. A really great resource on light, really understanding light, is Michael Freeman. Michael Freeman is an author, and he writes a lot of books on composition and light and the mind of a photographer, the voice, the style, like everything. He's brilliant, and he has these 3 books about light, and he breaks down light in to a beautiful way, but to a depth that will really help any photographer. And also I've linked this this video here. It's about cinematic lighting. So looking at lighting of photography from a film perspective will help you create more cinematic images. And I'll stop here just because we're at that marker time. Any questions?
All right. Thank you so much, Julia. Now, before we start in with the question and answer session, I would like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the question field in your control panel. All right, let's get to some of these questions. All right, so do you have any suggestions for shooting rainbows?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say if you underexpose rainbows, you're more likely to get brighter, more contrasted colors, like stronger colors in your rainbows. Likely you're going to have to edit those images quite a bit, or just a little, to emphasize the colors that you do find in a rainbow. And then another thing you can do with rainbows that I have seen that I have loved is changing the lenses you're using. So sometimes you might want that grand picturesque scene of a rainbow, but other times you can really pull in and have that rainbow like fill your screen a lot more, or see what is around your rainbow that you can maybe point to. What contextual clues can give your rainbow another level.
Great, thank you for that. So, would it be possible for you to discuss a little bit of your ISO to, excuse me, to your shutter speed calculations? Um, I'm sorry, yeah, when you're getting your shots, can you talk about that a little bit?
100%. So I have a video, another one is Digital Photography 101, where I go into that much more. I would say, just as brief as I can be, primarily I'd like to keep my ISO low. And if I don't need a boost of ISO, I'm going to keep it as low as possible. And I'm going to balance aperture and shutter as my first components. Which one I choose as my primary component or my primary thought depends on the subject. So for example, if I want to emphasize anything to do with motion, shutter speed is going to be my primary thought then aperture, then ISO. But if I want to play with depth of field as my primary thought, aperture, shutter, then ISO. Beyond that, I would definitely recommend the longer video because it's a big topic for a quick answer.
Great. Thank you so much. Now we have a guest who is headed out to the Northern Lights trip, and they're contemplating buying a Canon 15-35 millimeter f/2.8 lens. Is that good for anything other than night photography? Is there anything else that they can do with that? Is that something good for Northern Lights?
What a great question. Great lens for Northern Lights because you're getting that wide perspective. You can even go more extreme and get even wider to collect more light to get a bigger capture of that scene. That is a good lens for a wide number of other things. Landscapes, for example, great to have that wider perspective. But I will say in my experience, if you're accustomed to shooting with a longer lens or you see better with a longer lens, it might be a bit of an adjustment period for you to figure out how to best use that wide lens because the way you shoot with a wide lens is very different than the way you shoot with a long lens. For example, with a wide lens, you're going to need to find maybe foreground interest much more than you would need to with a long lens. And so how you position yourself or how you think, depending on your lens, does change. But great lens, yes.
So how often do you edit or develop your photos?
That's a great question. I like to post-process the images that I share. The amount that I do is very minimal, but I'd like to tweak each image. Yeah. I like things to still look natural, or still in 20 years when, the style and trends have changed. I still love my images. It feels classic. But I always edit my images. Yeah.
Do you think of light differently and shoot maybe at different times of day when you're shooting in black and white versus color?
Such a good question. Yes, very much so. Shooting in black and white. I think black and white sometimes lends itself better to harsh light because you have that contrast to play with. And that harsh light is your midday light. And so you might be out at lunchtime with your camera and just what can I make during this time of the day? So yeah, I think that's a really good question. I haven't thought about that, but I think there is a significant difference for sure.
So we know there are ways to get that wide angle effect without using a wide angle lens. Do you think you need a wide angle lens to get a better quality photo?
Depends on the circumstance. So for example, you can fake a wide perspective with a telephoto by doing a panorama, for example. But say you're doing Northern Lights photography, you can't easily do it in that circumstance. I think there are definitely times when it's better to have a dedicated lens to get those wide shots. Yeah.
Do you have any advice on how we can capture fog?
Wake up early and get yourself to some fog. I hear some cute cats in the background, but fog. I think the challenge, at least in my experience with fog, is just being around it, like finding it, being awake at the time of the day where it's most likely to be there. Photographically, I don't think it presents many like unique challenges itself. Yeah, I'll have to think about that one, but I think it's just getting to the time of the day where you're gonna find fog.
So you mentioned this Camera 101 class. Is there a particular link or a place that we can go to find this class?
Yeah, I think the Daily Dose of Nature link on the NatHab website, they have the previous um, daily doses. And I think if you were to go to the photography ones, you could find that there. I don't know if I'm able to put a link in the chat here, but I typically will do the photo ones. So I've done some on composition, I've done some on storytelling, on digital photography, Churchill tips, the whole gamut. So if you go to the NatHab website, go to Daily Doses of Nature, you can kind of see all the previous ones.
Great. Thank you so much for that. That's nathab.com/webinars, and we have all our past ones stored there for you to view at your pleasure. All right. Well, Julia, unfortunately, that will be the last question that we do have time for today. So I'd like to hand it back to you for your closing comments.
I just want to thank you guys so much. Thank you for putting up with me as my brain is so slow right now with jet lag. But hopefully there were a few things that you took out of that and that you can jump in and practice and play and enjoy just the light in your own environments. And I did a workshop recently with an artist, and he talked about how a lot of our work as artists is developing this repertoire of skills, and we develop it by practicing, and we have to go through bad images to get to our great images. So go have fun making some bad images and give yourself permission to make awful things to get to the great stuff.
Julia, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in today. So if you are interested in information on how you can travel with NatHab, please give us a call at 800-543-8917, or you can send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. Join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude today's webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.